They boasted of strength, humanity. Showed them true carnage. The chair was too small. That was the first thing I noticed when I sat down in the grand conclave hall. My knees were nearly level with the table edge, and the backrest ended somewhere around my shoulder blades. Nobody had built this chair for human. Nobody had expected humans to sit in it for very long. I adjusted my uniform jacket, placed my water glass to my right, and looked out across the chamber. The hall was enormous, a wide curved arc of tiered seating that held representatives from 41 recognized spacefaring civilizations. The ceiling was a transparent dome, and beyond it the stars hung still and cold, the way they always do when you are far enough from any sun. The station orbited nothing, it belonged to no one. That was the point. High Warlord Scareth of the Vretha Gemini was speaking. He had been speaking for some time. He was tall, broad-shouldered, scaled along the neck and jaw in pale green ridges that darkened when he raised his voice. His species had been traveling between stars for 4,000 years. He moved like someone who had never once been told to wait. The screen behind him showed footage of a moon. I recognized the coordinates as belonging to a rebel faction in the outer Vreth territories. The footage showed the Vreth fleet moving in tight formation, their directed energy weapons working in slow, deliberate sweeps across the surface. It was meant to look clean, controlled, a demonstration of power with no loose edges. The other delegates watched with polite attention. The Ulani Collective's 3 representatives, each seated behind a shared glass panel that filtered the light to their preferred spectrum, observed with calm, blinking eyes. The Serenthi elders sat motionless at the far end of the arc, as they always did, faces unreadable, very old and very quiet. The Kos Federation delegates were taking notes on slim devices in their laps. Nobody looked uncomfortable. That was the thing about this hall. Everyone in it had seen something like this before. War for most of these species was a chapter in their history. A managed, documented, occasionally revisited chapter, but a chapter. Nonetheless, it had edges, it had known shapes. Scareth concluded his presentation and looked directly at me. Not at the earth section of the chamber. In general, at me. His pale eyes settled on my face the way a stone settles at the bottom of a shallow pool, slowly, with full intention to stay there. Commander Voss, he said. His translator rendered his voice in clean, unaccented English. The Vretha Gemini has maintained galactic stability for 4,000 years. Our fleet operations are not demonstrations of aggression, they are demonstrations of resolve. He paused. Your kind has never fought a real war. The chamber was quiet. I looked at him. I did not look away. And I did not look angry. I had learned a long time ago that the most useful thing a face can do in a moment like that is nothing at all. I heard you, High Warlord, I said. My voice was level. Thank you for the presentation. He held my gaze for a moment longer, clearly expecting something more. Then he turned and returned to his seat. Counselor Davin of the Ulani Collective leaned slightly toward me from 2 seats away. His species communicated partially through shifting pigmentation in their facial skin, and right now his jaw had gone a pale, cautious yellow. He is attempting to establish hierarchy, Davin said quietly. You understand this? I understand it perfectly, I said. You are not concerned. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. I am always concerned. Counselor, I am just not always loud about it. Davin blinked twice. The yellow faded to a thoughtful amber. The session continued. 3 more civilizations made statements. A trade dispute between the Cause Federation and a mid-tier species called the Powry was tabled for next cycle. The Saranthe elders said nothing, as they almost never did. I listened to all of it. I took my own notes. I watched Scareth lean toward his aide and speak in low tones, and I watched the aide quietly angle a display screen away from the room. 90 minutes into the session, the message came through my earpiece. It was 3 seconds of encoded signal that only my clearance could decrypt. I had the translation in less than 4 seconds. And I read it twice, because the first time I read it, I thought there had been an error in the signal compression. There was no error. 3 human colony worlds in the outer buffer zone, Heron's Pass, Caldwell Station, and the agricultural settlement on Murin 4 had gone dark, completely dark. No signals, no beacons, no emergency transmissions. The last recorded contact from Heron's Pass had been 31 hours ago. The message from Caldwell Station had cut off in the middle of a sentence. The Vreth border fleet had repositioned. 2 days ago, Earth Command had flagged the movement as a pressure maneuver. They had not flagged it as an opening strike. They were revising that assessment now. I set my glass down carefully. I did not let my hand shake, because my hand did not shake. That was something I had worked out of myself a long time ago in a different uniform, in a different corner of the galaxy. I looked at Scareth. He was still leaning toward his aide. There was a small, satisfied expression on his face, the kind that belongs to someone who has already decided how the next conversation is going to go. I thought about the people on Heron's Pass. I had visited once 3 years ago for a territorial boundary review. It was a cold world with long winters and a farming community that had been there for 60 years. The mayor had made tea that tasted like something from the north of Scotland. His daughter had shown me her school project about the early colony ships. She had painted the hull of the first deep-range vessel in watercolors and had gotten the proportions nearly right. I let myself think about all of that for exactly as long as I could afford to, which was not long. Then I folded my notes, clipped them into my jacket pocket, and began composing my next message in my head. The session ended 40 minutes later. Delegates moved toward the adjoining halls in small clusters, exchanging pleasantries in 4 different languages. Scareth passed within 5 m of me on his way out. He did not look at me again. He would, I thought. Soon enough he would look at me with very careful attention. I stepped out onto the station's observation corridor alone and stood there for a moment, looking at the stars. Cold, still, patient. I had looked at them all my life and never found them comforting, but I had always found them clarifying. There is something useful about looking at something that does not care about the outcome. My comm unit buzzed. Earth Command. Priority channel. Commander Voss. The voice on the other end belonged to Admiral Leon Graves. Fleet operations. He sounded the way he always sounded, like a man who had been awake for too long and had made peace with it. You have received our signal. I have, I said. We are moving to a formal assessment. We need your read on the conclaves. Position before we decide on response. Posture. A small maintenance drone drifted past. The outside of the window, it's yellow. Light blinking in slow, steady pulses. The conclave will issue a statement of concern, I said. They will call for restraint. They will open a mediation. Request. That will take 6 days at minimum, more likely 9. End of breath. They expect us to accept mediation, I said. They expect us to come to the table, file grievances, accept a symbolic concession, and reset the boundary line in their favor, that is, the outcome they have already written. I paused. They wrote it because they do not know us. There was a brief silence. What do you recommend, Commander? I thought of Scareth's voice. Your kind has never fought a real war. Get the fleet ready, I said quietly, not loudly, not visibly, just ready. I ended the call and stood there a moment longer. Behind me, 41 civilizations were making small talk about trade routes and border agreements and who had said the wrong thing at last cycle's reception. None of them had any idea what the next several weeks were going to teach this galaxy. Humanity had not arrived at the stars. In ascent, we had arrived experienced. The UEFS Thermopylae cleared the conclave station's docking ring at 3:40 hours, running dark and at maximum speed toward the outer buffer zone. I stood on the bridge and watched the station fall away behind us on the rear display, a long silver structure against the black, already full of species composing their statements of concern. I had read 3 draft statements before. We undocked. Each one was carefully worded. Each one expressed serious alarm. Each one called for measured dialogue and mutual restraint. None of them would reach the colonies. Time to matter. Lieutenant Owen Kara was at the navigation console, running the approach calculations for the Murren system. He was 26, precise with numbers and nearly without small talk, which I had always considered a professional asset. He pulled up the last known trajectory of the Vreth border fleet and overlaid it on the system map without being asked. Arrival at Murren 4 in 11 hours. Commander, he said. Good. Plot herons passed in Caldwell. As sequential stops afterward. Understood. Specialist Nora Webb was running signal scans in a continuous loop, watching for any return signal from the 3 dark worlds. Her console had shown nothing but static for the entire transit, and she kept running the scans anyway. She was 23 and had only been with my crew for 7 months, but she did not stop scanning, and that told me everything I needed to know about her. There was one more person on the bridge who was not part of my crew. Counselor Davian had requested permission to travel with us when he learned where we were heading. I could have refused. I did not, because I wanted an Ulani observer with full conclave credentials to see exactly what we were going to find and exactly what we were going to do about it. Having Davian present was not sentimental, it was strategic. He stood near the main display with his hands clasped in front of him, his facial pigment cycling through the slow, steady shades his species used during sustained thought. He had not spoken since departure. After an hour he spoke. Your heart rate did not change when Scareth made his statement at the summit, he said. I monitored it. Ulani have passive biometric sensitivity at close range. I hope that does not offend you. It does not, I said. I have observed the biometric responses of representatives from 39 civilizations. During moments of provocation, elevated heart rate is a universal response. Across every species I have studied, it is a physiological marker of recognized danger. He paused. Yours remained completely steady. I know what my own responses feel like. I said, I have had many years to manage them. That is not the point I am making. Davian said carefully, I am asking whether your heart rate was steady, because you did not perceive his statement as a threat at all. I looked at him. I perceived it as a mistake. I said, those are different things. He was quiet for a moment, the yellow in his jaw shifted slowly toward a deep, considering blue. I have studied the military history of the Vreth hegemony at considerable length, he said. They have conducted 42 formal conflicts across 4,000 years of spacefaring history. Their strategies are well documented, their command structures are efficient, their technology is mature and tested. He paused. They are genuinely formidable. They are, I agreed. Then help me understand your confidence, Commander. I considered how to answer, not because I lacked the words, but because I was deciding how much of it would be useful and how much of it Davian would actually absorb before he saw the evidence for himself. The Vreth have fought 42 conflicts in 4,000 years, I said, roughly one every century. That is a meaningful record. It means their commanders carry institutional memory across generations, and their tactics have been tested and refined over a very long time. I leaned back in my chair. Humanity, in 5,000 years of recorded history on a single planet before we ever built a ship capable of leaving our own star system, fought more than 10,000 separate organized conflicts, wars, sieges, territorial campaigns, prolonged resource disputes, sustained structured large-scale engagements, more than 10,000 of them, counselor on one world. Davian was very still. That means, I continued, that humanity did not discover war late and visited occasionally. We were born inside it. We grew up in it. We passed it down across generations the way other species pass down language or art, with documentation, with study, with deliberate improvement. We built universities dedicated to understanding the mechanics of conflict. We wrote libraries about strategy, logistics, supply chain, psychology, leadership, and endurance. We made the study of sustained conflict a serious academic discipline and spent 3,000 years getting better at it. I looked at the static on Nora's screen. When we finally decided as a species to reduce the frequency of wars among ourselves, it was not because we forgot how to fight. It was because we had learned enough to make a different choice. I paused. The Vreth think they are a warrior civilization. They have no idea what that phrase actually means in our vocabulary. Davin said nothing for a long time. The blue in his jaw deepened by several degrees. Then why, he said at last, has humanity not dominated this galaxy from the moment you arrived? Because we did not come here to dominate it, I said. We came here to live in it. There is a significant difference between those two things. He thought about that. I thought about other things. I thought about the 4,300 registered residents of Heron's Pass, mostly families. The colony had been Operational for 62 years, which meant there were children living there who had been born on that world and had never seen Earth. It was the only home they had ever known. They had built it from prefabricated parts and hard winters and 6 decades of collective work, the way humans build everything, by deciding that a difficult thing is not the same as an impossible thing. I thought about what it meant that the signal from Caldwell Station had cut off mid-sentence. I did not let that thought become feeling because I could not afford a feeling right now. I filed it away in the part of my mind that holds things I would deal with later, and I turned my attention back to the bridge. Commander, Owen's voice was quiet. Arrival at Marin 4 in 40 minutes. All crew full stations, I said. The bridge shifted around me as the crew settled into their positions, every chair occupied, every screen active. Finn Cole, my senior pilot, had his hands already on the manual override console. Tobias Hart had moved to the secondary sensor station and was running a parallel scan alongside Nora. Ada Marsh was standing by at communications, headset on ready. Then I picked up my comm unit and opened a direct channel to Admiral Graves at Earth Command. Authorization request, I said, quiet. Protocols. The line was silent for 4 seconds. Field assessment, Graves said. 3 colonies unresponsive for over 30 hours, I said. Vreth border fleet repositioned without prior notification. No declaration, no warning. Civilian populations on all 3 worlds. I paused. This was not a pressure maneuver. Another silence. Authorization granted, Graves said. Quiet protocols active as of this timestamp. Rules of engagement are yours, Commander. I ended the channel. Owen and Nora were both looking at me. So were Finn and Ada and Tobias. The bridge had gone very quiet. You know what we are going to find when we arrive, I said, and you know what we are going to do after we find it. Every station at full capacity, every system checked, every one of you sharp and ready. I let that settle for a moment. We do this properly, we do it completely, and we come home. Nobody said anything. They turned back to their consoles. Davian stood motionless near the display, and the color in his jaw had shifted to something I had not seen in an Alani before, a deep, steady gray. 40 minutes later, Maron 4 appeared on the forward screen. The colony was not. 4 appeared on the forward, the landing platforms were intact, but there were no lights, no heat signatures from occupied buildings, no movement across any frequency that Nora's scans could detect. Everyone was gone. The entire population of Murin 4, 1,160 people had been removed, taken. Every transport vehicle on the planet had been moved from its registered position. Agricultural fields, still growing in neat rows under the pale sun, were completely undisturbed. Scareth had taken the people and left the property. He wanted us to know he could reach us. Wherever we settled, he wanted us to understand that our people, scattered across hundreds of worlds, were accessible to him anytime he chose to extend his hand. He wanted us to feel small and exposed and very far from home. I looked at the empty colony on the screen for a long, quiet moment. Then I said, set course for Vreth. Border space. Best possible speed. The human task force emerged from transit 7 hours later at the edge of Vreth border space. There were no broad formations designed to be seen from a distance, no. Declarations transmitted on open channels the ships dropped out of. Transit one after another in a precise sequence that looked to any outside observer like the movements of a professional crew completing a procedure they had performed many times before. Because that was exactly what it was. Davin was still on the bridge. He stood quietly near the display and watched the tactical screen as our force assembled. He had studied enough military history to recognize a fleet when he saw one. But something about what he was seeing was not fitting the shape he expected. There are only 14 vessels, he said. Carefully. Yes, I said. The Vreth force in this sector numbers over 40 ships. I know. Commander, the numerical difference alone. Counselor, I said, I need you to watch, not advise. Can you do that? He stopped speaking. His jaw went a careful, attentive green. Each of our 14 ships had been assigned specific function before we left the station, not a general tactical role, a precise defined purpose. 2 vessels were carrying signal disruption arrays. 3 were configured for long-range precision targeting of infrastructure. Rather than direct ship engagement, 2 were rapid response ships assigned to protect the others during operations. 1 was dedicated entirely to communications intercept and relay. The remaining 6 were combat configured and assigned in pairs to 3 separate engagement zones. No ship was doing more than one job. No job was being done by more ships than were assigned to it. Vin Cole spoke from the pilot station. Vreth formation, holding at bearing 274. No movement since we came out of transit. They are waiting to see what we do, I said. Let them wait. Begin phase 1. The 2 signal disruption ships moved. First, drifting wide of the main formation on a course that would take them to the outer relay points of the Vreth communication network. Not jamming everything, that would be too obvious and too easily countered. Selectively interrupting specific relay node, precise cuts in precisely chosen places. Within 20 minutes, 3 of the Vreth fleet's repair and resupply stations had lost contact with their central command structure. The stations themselves were untouched. The ships docked at them were untouched. But the flow of information that connected the Vreth force and told it what to do and where to go had several of its key pathways quietly severed. Davian watched the tactical display. You are not engaging their ships, he said. Not yet, I said. You are cutting their communication lines. Among other things, their supply routes are also being affected. Yes. Davian was quiet for a moment. Then I have read 15,000 years of compiled galactic military strategy across 23 civilizations. I have never seen this specific approach in any of them. It is not in any of their textbooks, I said. It is in ours. The Vreth fleet commander, a warlord named Gret, 1 rank below Scaroth, responded after 11 minutes with a formation shift. He pulled his ships into a tighter defensive cluster around the 3 primary supply depots. That was exactly what I expected. Phase 2, I said. The 3 infrastructure ships moved not toward the supply depots, away from them. They took up positions near the transit corridors connecting this sector to the Vreth resupply lines further in system. Not blocking the corridors, just present, visible. Gret now had two separate problems: the communication disruption already in progress and the visible threat to his resupply corridors. Both were real, neither was immediately critical, but managing both simultaneously with a force that had not been prepared for this type of engagement was going to be very difficult. That was the point. Davian spoke quietly. You are not trying to destroy his fleet. No, I said. You are making it impossible for his fleet to function. Correct. There is a difference, Davian said. And his voice had changed. It was slower, now more deliberate, like someone placing their foot carefully on ground they were not sure would hold them. The Vreth measure engagement by direct confrontation, ship against ship, formation against formation. What you are doing does not match their understanding of battle. They will not recognize this as a fight. They will recognize it as a problem, I said. That is sufficient. The first direct engagement happened 40 minutes later when two Vreth patrol ships moved to intercept the infrastructure vessels near the transit corridor. Our escort ships met them. That engagement was direct and fast, and exactly the kind of thing the Vreth had trained for. It lasted 9 minutes. Both Vreth patrol ships withdrew with significant damage to their propulsion systems. Our ships were untouched. Nora exhaled slowly at her console. I did not comment. Davian had moved closer to the tactical display. Your pilots are not fighting the way Vreth pilots fight, he said. No, I said, they are not. Vreth pilots seek dominant positioning. They maneuver for advantage and then press it. They are trained to read the situation and respond to it dynamically. He paused. Your pilots are not responding to the situation. They are executing a sequence. They already decided how this ends. Before it started, I said, they are completing the steps. Davian said nothing for a long moment. Then very quietly, that is considerably more unsettling than anything I expected to see. 4 hours into the engagement, Gret requested a temporary pause in hostilities to allow for communication with his command structure. I denied the request. Ada looked up from the communications console. Commander, denial of ceasefire at this stage is. I know what it is, I said. Deny it. She transmitted the denial. Davian turned to me. The Galactic Conclave protocols specify that ceasefire requests at the secondary engagement stage. Counselor, I said, the Gret did not pause when they removed 1,160 people from Marin 4. They did not send a ceasefire request before they cut the signal from Caldwell Station. Mid-sentence, I kept my voice level. Momentum is a tool. You do not set a tool down when you are in the middle of using it. Davian did not respond. The color in his jaw went a very pale, very careful white. By hour 6, the Gret force in this sector had 3 supply depots, effectively cut off from their logistics chain, 2 forward bases unable to receive orders from their command structure, and 4 ships withdrawn from active operations with significant system damage. No Gret ship had been destroyed outright. No Gret crew had been seriously harmed beyond the engagement damage to the 2 patrol vessels. But the Gret border fleet, for the first time in 4,000 years of unbroken operational history, did not know what to do next. They had no framework for this. They had maps of every kind of battle. They had ever fought, and none of those maps matched what was happening to them. Every response they attempted created a new problem. Every move Gret made opened a gap somewhere else. The engagement was not fighting them head-on, it was simply making it impossible for them to operate one careful step at a time with the methodical patience of something that had done far more difficult things than this. When Scareth's personal channel opened, not Gret's channel, not a fleet broadcast, but Scareth's own private command frequency, I knew before he said a single word that something fundamental had changed. His voice was measured, controlled, careful in a way it had not been in the conclave hall. "Commander Voss," he said, "you are escalating a situation that can still be resolved through dialogue." I looked at the tactical display, then I looked at the communications panel for a long, quiet moment. "High Warlord," I said, "you told me in front of 41 civilizations that my people have never fought a real war." I paused. "I want to make sure you understand with complete clarity that what you are seeing right now is not even close to what we are capable of. This is us being careful." Another pause. "I suggest you think very seriously about whether you want to see what we look like when we stop being careful." The channel was silent. Then Scareth said something in his own language, something his translator did not render because it was not meant for me. But I heard the tone of it. 4,000 years of certainty, 4,000 years of standing in rooms and demonstrating strength and never once being seriously questioned, and in the voice of the High Warlord of the Vreth hegemony, for the very first time in all of those years there was something new. Not anger, not pride, something far more honest than either. We reached the outer perimeter of Vreth Prime 2 days later. The transit had been quiet and purposeful. We had not destroyed the border fleet. We had not needed to. By the time we entered Vreth home space, Gret's force was operating at reduced capacity, logistically isolated, and reporting upward to command structure that was engaged in an active internal dispute about what to do next. We knew this because we had been reading a significant portion of their communications traffic since hour 3 of the engagement. The inner worlds of the Vreth hegemony were striking in a cold and angular way. Vreth Prime itself was a dense, dark planet with wide equatorial belts of mineral formations that caught the light at certain angles and held it. From orbit, it looked like a map drawn in amber against the dark. I stood on the bridge and looked at it on the forward display and felt nothing sentimental about it. The planet's defense grid was active. That was expected, a layered system. Perimeter sensors, intercept platforms, surface-based long-range weapons. Against a full human carrier fleet, it would have been a manageable problem, requiring careful planning. Against 14 vessels, it was a meaningful barrier. We did not approach it. We held position at the outer perimeter, and we waited. Scareth opened the channel within the hour. He had expected us to either retreat or advance. Waiting was not a choice he had prepared a response for. "You are holding at the perimeter," he said. His voice was carefully composed, but the careful composition itself told me things that an unguarded voice would not have. "We are," I said. "You cannot breach the defense grid with your current force." "Probably not," I agreed. A pause. "Then what are you doing?" "Waiting," I said, "and transmitting." I had sent a file to his personal command channel 20 minutes earlier. It was not a tactical document. It was not a list of demands or a negotiation framework. It was a registry. Names, dates, ages, colony of residence, last known location. Every person from Murin 4, Heron's Pass, and Caldwell Station, all 6,412. Of them, their full civilian records, pulled from Earth's population database. Not just names, family members, employment histories, community roles, years of service to their colonies, the mayor of Heron's Pass and his daughter, the medical team at Caldwell Station who had been in the middle of a routine shift when the signal went dark, the farming families on Murin 4, 3 generations of some of them who had built something out of a cold world through 60 years of steady, collective effort. 6,412 individual people. This is what you took, I said. I need you to read every name on that list. Scarith, not as a number, not as a statistic, as a name, as a person. I paused, and then I need you to tell me where they are. The channel was silent for a long time. While I waited, another feed opened. Conclave emergency session forwarded to me by Davin from the station. The full assembly had convened after our engagement in the border sector became too large to ignore or table. 41 civilizations, their representatives, gathered in the same hall where 4 days ago Scarith had told 41 civilizations that humanity had never fought a real war. The session had been chaotic for the first hour, species debating jurisdiction and protocol and the appropriate response framework, the CAS Federation calling for sanctions, Ulani Collective presenting a resolution demanding immediate ceasefire, the Palari and 2 other mid-tier civilizations arguing about whether the buffer zone classification even permitted this type of engagement. Everyone was talking. And then the Serenthi elder at the far end of the arc, the one who had not moved or spoken in 4 days of summit proceedings, who had not, as far as I was aware, made a formal statement to the full conclave in over 60 years, raised one long gray hand. The hall went completely silent. The Serenthi elders were the oldest continuous spacefaring civilization. This part of the galaxy, they had been traveling between stars for longer than most species had been, writing things down. They spoke rarely and specifically, and never wasted a syllable. The elder, whose name translated as Varanset, spoke for 4 minutes. Davin forwarded me the transcript in real time. Varanset said that the Serenthi had been observing Earth from a distance for more than 200 years, long before first contact. They had monitored humanity's history from orbit. They had seen the full scale of what had happened on that planet across 5,000 years of recorded activity. They had considered making contact several times and had each time concluded that the timing was not right. They had not warned the other conclave species about humanity, Varanset said, because they had assumed the other species already understood. They had made an error of assumption, and they were acknowledging it formally. Humanity, Varsed said in the flat, measured tone of someone stating a fact about the physical universe rather than making an argument, is not a young civilization that has not yet experienced serious conflict. Humanity is a civilization that has spent 5,000 years becoming exceptionally, systematically, and deliberately capable. In it, what you are watching in the Border sector right now is not a provoked young species reacting without discipline. It is a mature species with 10,000 conflicts in its institutional memory, responding to a specific threat with a fraction of its actual capacity. The fraction it has chosen to apply is already sufficient. The fraction it has chosen to withhold is the more important number. He sat down. The conclave hall was silent for 11 full seconds. I closed the feed. I sat in my chair on the bridge of the Thermopylae and I thought about those 11 seconds of silence in a room full of species who talked constantly about everything. Then I thought about Petra. Petra was 14 years old and lived with my sister in Reykjavik. She liked mathematics and rowing and a particular brand of Icelandic chocolate that she could not find anywhere else and regularly asked me to bring home in bulk. She was the most consistently reasonable person I had ever known, including every senior officer and diplomat I had ever worked with professionally. I opened a personal comm channel. It was late at home, past midnight, but she answered on the second ring. Mom, her voice was sleep rough but alert. She always answered when I called, regardless of the hour. Hey, sweetheart, I said. My voice came out steady. It always came out steady. Sorry about the time. It's fine. Are you okay? I am, I said. I am doing my job. Okay, the pause. Are you almost done? I looked at the amberlit planet on the forward display, at Owen's readouts on the navigation console, at Nora's scan results, which had finally picked up faint life sign indicators from Caldwell Station 2 hours ago. Alive, being held in a facility on one of the Vreth secondary moons. Almost, I said. I will be home soon. Good, Petra said. I need someone to row with. Uncle Greg is too slow. I laughed. It was a real laugh, short and quiet but real, the first one in several days. Get some sleep, I said. You too. I closed the channel. The bridge was quiet around me. I was aware that Owen and Nora had heard the conversation. I was aware that they had not looked at each other or commented, which was exactly the right choice. Tobias Hart came up from the lower deck. With 2 cups of coffee, he set one on the console beside me without a word. I picked it up and drank it and looked at the planet and waited. 3 hours later, Scareth was removed from command of the Vreth hegemony by a unanimous decision of the Inner Council. The announcement came through official hegemony channels, addressed directly to my vessel with a request for immediate negotiation. Not dialogue, not mediation, not a review process. Negotiation. They used that specific word and I noted it carefully. The first session was conducted by secure channel between myself and the hegemony senior council representative, an elder official named Verk who had the careful manner of someone working very hard to calibrate his tone and not entirely sure how to do it. He opened by offering reparations for the 3 colonies and a formal withdrawal of the border fleet to pre-incident positions. I listened to all of it without interrupting. Then I told him that reparations and withdrawal were not conditions. They were starting assumptions, the floor, not the ceiling. The actual conditions would begin with the immediate location and return of all 6,412 colonists from the 3 displaced worlds, beginning within 24 hours. The return must be complete, I said. Not a representative portion, not a Symbolic group, every person on that list with full documentation of their current condition and a complete inventory of everything removed from their settlements. I paused. I also require something else. Name it, Verk said. I want the name of every person on that list read aloud and acknowledged in a formal statement to the Galactic Conclave by the Hegemony Senior Council. Not as a collective group, not as a statistic. I let that settle for a moment. 6,412 names entered into the formal record of the Galactic Conclave, every single one. There was a long silence. That will take considerable time, Verk said. Yes, I said, it will. Another silence. Agreed, Verk said at last. I signed the preliminary agreement 3 hours later. The quiet protocols remained active until the first transport vessel, carrying colonists from the secondary moon, docked safely at a verified neutral station, at which point I stood them down, personally with my own authorization code, and transmitted the confirmation to Earth Command. Owen exhaled slowly at his console. Nora pressed her palms flat on her workstation and bowed her head for a moment, very briefly. Tobias said quietly and without any particular drama, good. I did not say anything. I finished my coffee and looked at the stars outside. The forward display, cold still, patient, exactly as they always were. And I let myself feel briefly and privately the weight of everything the last 6 days had contained. Then I set the cup down. Set course for the conclave station, I said, standard speed. 1 year later, I sat in a chair that fit perfectly. They had replaced my seat in the conclave hall. I had not requested it. The change had been made by the station's facility staff sometime between my departure after the preliminary agreement and my return 6 weeks later as a full counselor. Someone had measured a human, built a chair accordingly, and installed it at the Earth position in the arc without any comment or ceremony. That small thing told me more about how the conclave had changed than any formal document could have. The hall was still enormous, the dome was still clear, the stars still cold and patient beyond it. 41 civilizations still sat in their tiered positions along the arc. The Serenthi elders were still at the far end, still largely motionless, still rarely speaking. But the air in the room was different. I cannot describe it in any precisely measurable way. It was a difference in the quality of attention. When I walked into a session now, I noticed things. Small things, delegates who had previously not made eye contact with Earth's representative making deliberate, careful eye contact now. Session chairs who had previously listed Earth at the bottom of the speaking order, quietly adjusting the sequence without explanation. The Paley representative who had always sat with her back at a 45 degrees angle to the Earth position as a gesture of mild social dismissal now sat facing the room squarely. Nobody mentioned any of these changes. They simply happened. Counselor Bricks of the KO's Federation was the first to approach me formally. The KOs were traders by nature and by history. Their civilization ran on precise calculation and carefully drafted contracts, and they were very good at both. They had observed the events of the preceding months with the focused attention of a species that understood better than most that military capability and economic stability were deeply connected. They had run the numbers had told them something specific. Brix met me in one of the corridor annexes after the morning session, which was the KO's way of indicating that this was a conversation they preferred to have privately without formal record. We are interested in a mutual defense framework, she said. She was direct in the way that KO's people always were. Not cold but precise, she said what she meant and expected the same in return. I am aware, I said, your delegate has sent 3 exploratory signals to Earth Command in the past month. Brix did not appear embarrassed by this. We wanted to gauge the receptiveness of your central government before approaching you directly. It seemed prudent. She paused. Is Earth receptive? Earth is open to discussion, I said. Mutual defense framework is a significant commitment on both sides. We would need to define the terms with care. Of course, she paused again. Counselor, may I ask you something directly? Yes. The engagement in the border sector, she said. The approach your fleet used, that. She searched briefly for the right word. The systematic quality of it, is that standard human military doctrine. It is one approach among several, I said. We have others. Brix was quiet for a moment. How many others? More than you would find comfortable as a number, I said. She nodded slowly. Then we are very interested in the mutual defense framework, she said. Very interested. Indeed. I told her to submit a formal proposal to Earth's diplomatic office and scheduled a preliminary session for the following month. She thanked me with the precise, measured courtesy that the K's use when they consider a meeting to have gone well. 3 days later, the Ulani Collective made their approach. It was not a diplomatic delegation. Davin came to me personally, which surprised me until he explained that the collective had voted to make this a personal communication rather than an official one, because the nature of what they were asking felt too significant to reduce to a standard formal request. We want to understand humanity's history, he said, not as a political study, not as a military analysis, all of it, the complete record from the earliest documented period to the present. He paused. We have researchers who are prepared to spend years on this work, possibly multiple generations. We believe it is the most important scholarly undertaking our collective has identified in the past 3 centuries. I looked at him for a moment. I have a recommendation, I said. Please. Start with the 20th century, I said. It is roughly 100 years of Earth time. In the middle to late period of our pre-spaceflight history. I paused. Do not skip anything. Davin blinked. His jaw shifted through several colors in rapid succession. Is there a specific reason you recommend that particular period? Because it contains the clearest record of what humanity looks like when things go very wrong, I said, and also the clearest record of what we look like when we decide collectively and at great cost to make them right again. It is the period that most honestly explains who we are and how we got here. I paused. Once you understand the 20th century, the rest of our history will make considerably more sense. I gave his delegation access to the full Earth Historical Archive the following morning. 7 Ulani researchers arrived at the station's research wing the next day with more preparation materials than I had ever seen any delegation bring to anything. Davin stopped by my office before they began their first session. Thank you, he said. Thank them when they finish, I said. It is a long read. He considered that for a moment, and something in his expression shifted in a way that was, I was fairly certain, the Ulani equivalent of a quiet smile. The message from Scareth arrived on a private channel 11 weeks after the formal agreement had been signed. He had been stripped of his rank and title by the hegemony's inner council. The formal proceedings against him had concluded with a reduced administrative posting in an outer system facility. Not imprisonment in any formal sense, but the Wrath version of exile. He would spend the remainder of his life in a position of no authority, in a location no one of consequence would visit. The message was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph was formal hegemony. Language, a standard acknowledgement of the agreement and its terms, correct. Impersonal, containing no actual meaning. Beyond legal compliance. The second paragraph was different. He wrote, I have read the list you sent to my channel, all 6,412 names. I read them as you asked, not as a group as names. It took me 4 hours. Then the third paragraph. A question. He wrote, how do you live with what you are? I have spent my entire life in the service of strength. I know exactly what I am, and I have never once questioned whether it was the right thing to be. But I have now spent 4 hours reading the names of people who were not soldiers, people who built something on a cold world over 60 years and asked nothing of anyone, and I removed them from it to demonstrate a point, and you came with 14 ships and did not destroy my fleet. You did not threaten my world. You sent me a list of names instead and said, this is what you took. I want to understand the part of you that can do what you did in the border sector, and then send a list of names and see both of those things as belonging to the same person. I sat with that message for a long time. Then I wrote back 2 sentences. I will not share what those 2 sentences said. Some things are not meant to be reported, they are meant to be sent, received, and considered by the person they were written for. What I will say is that Scareth did not reply, but the silence that followed was different from the silence before my message. I cannot explain the difference precisely, I simply noticed it. I flew home 3 weeks later. Earth appeared on the forward display, the way it always did, slowly at first. Just a small shape against the black, then filling more of the screen as we descended through the approach corridor. And then finally, the kind of view that never becomes ordinary, no matter how many times you have seen it. Clouds over the North Atlantic, the green and brown patchwork of land below, the particular quality of light that belongs only to a sky with a thick atmosphere and a yellow sun close enough to feel personal. I did not realize I had stopped talking mid-sentence to Owen until he politely cleared his throat. I completed the approach notes, finished the docking sequence, thanked my crew, and then stood in the Thermopolis docking corridor for a moment with my bag over my shoulder and thought about the last 14 months. The conclave had opened a formal inquiry into the buffer zone incidents. Earth's diplomatic office was managing it. The colonists from all 3 worlds had been returned, all 6,412 of them in good health with full documentation. The mayor of Heron's Pass had sent me a message I had not been able to finish reading on the first attempt, but had managed on the second. The Vreth hegemony had read every name on the list into the conclave record, as agreed. It had taken 2 full sessions. The hall had been very quiet throughout both of them. The Cathar Mutual Defense proposal was in its 3rd draft. The Ulani researchers were, according to Davin, currently working through the middle of the 20th century and had already submitted 3 requests for additional archive access. Varen said had not spoken again at a full conclave session, but one of the Serenthi elder staff had forwarded me brief note unsigned that said, "We have been watching since before your first Eprang vessel left your star system. We are glad you are here. We are also glad you chose restraint." I had read that note 4 times. Petra met me at the transit terminal. She was taller than the last time I had seen her, which I always found slightly startling, even though I understood it was inevitable. She had grown her hair longer and was wearing a jacket I did not recognize, and she had the expression she always wore when she was trying not to look relieved, which meant she had been worried and had decided that saying so would be unfair to me. I hugged her for a long time and did not say anything. She did not say anything either, which was exactly right. We walked to a small coffee place near the terminal, one we had visited before, with wooden tables and a menu on a chalkboard and a row of plants along the window that looked consistently better than plants in coffee shops usually do. I ordered a flat white, she ordered hot chocolate and a piece of cake, and then we sat across from each other at a table that fit perfectly, in chairs that were the right size, and I looked at my daughter and the plant on the windowsill and the ordinary street outside the glass. People walked past with bags and headphones and conversations I could not hear. A child pointed at something above the roofline. 2 elderly people sat on the bench across the street, one of them laughing at something the other had just said. Petra broke a piece off her cake and pushed the plate toward me. I took a piece. "So," she said, "did you sort it out?" She had the particular directness she had always had, the kind that does not ask for drama just for the honest version of events. "Yes," I said, "I sorted it out." "Good." She sipped her chocolate. "Because I really need a rowing partner. And Uncle Greg is genuinely hopeless." I laughed. It was a real laugh, full and warm, the kind that belongs to sitting across from someone you love at a table that fits, with coffee at exactly the right temperature, on a planet that is specifically and irreplaceably yours. Later I walked home through the park near Petra's school. The afternoon had gone gold along the tree line, and the air was cold enough to see your breath, and there were 2 dogs chasing each other in wide circles near the fountain, and a group of students sitting on the grass with open books, even though it was probably too cold for it. The way students always insist on being outside when they reasonably should not. I stopped walking for a moment and just stood there. I thought about Scareth in the conclave hall, 4,000 years of absolute certainty behind him, looking across the chamber at me and saying, "Your kind has never fought a real war." I thought about Varenset's voice. Civilization so old it had been watching Earth from orbit while we were still learning to build our first ships, saying with the flat precision of someone stating a fact about the physical world, "The fraction it has chosen to withhold is the more important number." I thought about the list, 6,412 names, and about Scareth alone in a room in an outer system facility where no one of consequence would ever visit reading. Every single one of them over 4 hours. I thought about Petra saying sorted out as though the last 14 months had been a complicated errand that needed finishing. And I thought about what the Vreth had never been able to understand, what all of them, the Vreth, the Kaz, the Ulani, the Poweri, all 41 civilizations in their tiered seats beneath the dome had failed to understand when they looked at humanity and tried to calculate what we were. They thought the dangerous part of us was the 10,000 wars. They were wrong. The dangerous part was this: the park, the coffee, the way Petra laughed at her uncle, the mayor's daughter, and her watercolor painting, the farming families on Murin for 3 generations of them growing things from cold ground, because they had decided, as all humans eventually decide, that a difficult thing is not the same as an impossible thing. This was what we were protecting, not territory, not political standing, not the abstract concept of humanity's position among the stars. All of this specific, ordinary, completely irreplaceable life. That was why when someone reached out and took it, when someone calculated that our people were a pressure point, a tool, a thing to be moved and returned, as a gesture in a negotiation they had already scripted, they had made a mistake that no amount of experience or certainty or 4,000 history could correct. Not because we were the most powerful force in the galaxy, but because we knew with a clarity that no other species had yet developed exactly what we were fighting for, not dominance, not the satisfaction of being feared, not a line on a star chart. The park, the coffee, Petra on the water at dawn. And there is no fleet, no formation, no carefully constructed defense grid, no statement of concern issued by 41 civilizations from their cushioned seats beneath a dome that will ever change. What happens to the people who make us fight for those things? They boasted of strength. They meant it honestly. They had built empires on it. They had traveled between stars on the back of it and stood in grand halls and spoken about it for 4,000 years with the steady confidence of species that had never once been truly tested. They had no idea what strength even was. I did. I put my hands in my pockets and walked home through the gold afternoon, past the dogs and the students and the cold fountain, and the path was familiar and solid under my feet, and the air smelled like rain from the night before, and somewhere ahead my daughter was probably already making her way to the water. I walked a little faster,